Okay. Hey folks. We are hopping back in. Give me one sec. Hopefully I won't accidentally create two of me this time. But we'll take it as it comes. Hi folks. Um, I think if I just do this, fingers crossed, it should be fine. If you don't see me, sorry about that. But we're gonna jump right in. Today we're gonna be talking about donors and users. Um, again, I wanted to position this particular conversation before we get into processing, because I think the dialogue and conversations that we'll have through the rest of this semester will really be informed by the sorts of relationships that we cultivate with the people in our orbit as archivists. So far in our class, we focused mostly on our own roles as archivists. But today we're going to zero in on the other major actors involved in the archival process. Before we do anything else, though, I did want to give this little opportunity as a heads up as folks are working on their finding aid analysis. Um, Here is the correct citation format for citing a finding aid in APA. It's author, year in parentheses, title of the finding aid in italics, the name of the repository, and a division if it has one, and then the URL. Nothing else necessary. So if no author is listed, just provide the name of the repository, year, title of finding aid, um, and the URL. If there's no specific division, you can leave off the second instance of the repository. You don't need to list it twice. If it's a particular division, you can list that instead of the author and then the full repository later. If a finding aid has been edited in any way, shape, or form, if you can tell both who originally wrote it and who changed it later, good record keeping will indicate this. You'll put the original author, year, title of the finding aid in italics, the name of the repository and division, and then note it was edited by, and then provide the editor's name with the URL. In APA format, as a reminder, when you're citing names at the beginning, it's just last name, comma, first initial, period. Um, when you're citing an editor later, you'll say edited by and provide their full name. So let's say that the finding aid was originally written by Viola Davis, and then it was later edited by Margot Robbie. You would say Davis, comma, V, period, edited by Margot Robbie. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions about that. So let's talk about archivists, donors, and users. These are three uh, entirely different entities with different relationships to an archive, to the objects in an archive's care. You may find yourself occupying all three of these roles at some point in your life. You may be processing a collection or caring for it as an archivist. You may be donating materials to an archive of some kind. And you may be using an archive as a visitor or researcher of some kind. But depending on what vantage position you are looking at the collection from, at the archive from, you're going to have different relationship to those objects. I'll also say that these boundaries can get a little bit porous, especially in like a community archives context. But just to situate this conversation in the sort of broad strokes generals of if we're assuming that archivists, donors, and users are in fact different people, these are generally speaking some of the goals that those groups tend to have. Archivists' highest priority is preserving objects, making them accessible to other people. Donors, um, generally speaking, highest priority when donating materials to an archive is to secure a legacy of some kind. Could be their legacy, could be the legacy of a loved one, could be the legacy of an organization, some body that they were involved with. Then the next priority, um, and depending on the donor, these may range. This isn't necessarily a strict hierarchy, but a lot of people donate to an archive because they don't want to hold on to objects anymore. They are running out of space, or they're downsizing, or they don't feel that they have the resources available to properly preserve an object to care for it. So they would like to transfer the materials somewhere else. Um, and then increasing prestige. This can be tied very closely with the concept of legacy. How I would separate these terms is that legacy is future oriented, is thinking about how you will be perceived in the future. Prestige tends to be more focused on the present. You increase your prestige in order to increase your opportunities as an artist, as a creative, as a collaborator, as an institution to increase your impact or visibility. Prestige is more short-term focus than legacy generally. And finally, we have users, patrons, researchers, readers, all this, the sort of the folks who will be interacting with your materials once they've been archived. Tend to have a variety of goals, which include researching the materials and the history around them, analyzing the materials for some meaning, some secondary value that those objects may have. Uh, Once they have analyzed those objects, they will then interpret or write about that collection in order to generate new knowledge. And then they create or publish, they release that information. So each of these positions will be doing some amount of work to inform or to reform history. Depending on your role as the archivist, you may be working at a repository that sees the archive's job as uh, more passive. But I would encourage you to step into your power as an archivist. You are a critical part in the path of history making, in preserving stories and making stories accessible, in what stories will be told in the future. Um, Donors are a part of the fabric of the events that have come before us. And working with archivists, they help secure that past to travel into the future. And users make new meanings and new relationships and new knowledge um, from those materials simply by nature of interacting with them. So, when we think about donor behavior, broadly speaking, um, as a repository, most of the time you're going to be interacting with some amount of donors who are actively giving material to your repository. If you're in more of like a records management position, where all of the files that are entering your archive are doing so on a sort of passive accruals basis, um, this may look a little bit different for you, but generally speaking, the vast majority of archives interact with donors of some kind. And those donors can be consistent, they can be regular people donating with regular frequency, or it could be a situation where somebody donates once, their friends donate, their friends donate, etc., etc. So, regardless of the situation you find yourself in, um, I think that it's very helpful to zoom back and start by asking who are the sort of people who are generating the materials that are ending up in your archive? And then who's donating those materials to the archive? Is it the same people who created those records? Is it other people who accumulated those records later? Is it private art collectors who are wanting to donate materials to your archive or museum? And has this changed over time? Have your donors been consistent? has the sort of general profile of who is donating to your archive. Um, is it broad? Is it narrow? And there's not necessarily good or bad answers to these questions because it's going to be context dependent, obviously. But it's good to be able to interrogate who is donating to your archive so that way you can identify who's missing, who's not in the picture right now, who could be later, or who could be right now. What relationships do you need to build with within your donor community in order to grow your funds, in order to grow your archive, to be more reflective of whatever it is that you're seeking to collect. Um, and it's also helpful to think about what are the things that donors are looking to receive. Again, could be legacy, could be prestige, there could be a tit for tat kind of relationship. Um, uh, there's no right or wrong sort of way to form the donor relationship, but it's good to know where both sides of the table are coming from, so that you can meet one another's needs as effectively as possible. So, let's say you have a donor base. We're going to say that we're working at an archive for postmodern sculptural works. Our archive focuses on some level of 3D art that has been created from, let's say, 1965 to the present. Um, a lot of the material in the archive skews toward the 1970s. Oh, and let's give it a geographic focus. We'll say that it's New York. Um, a lot of the materials in the archive, let's say, skew towards the 1970s or 1980s. Uh, and you're noticing that there are gaps, that there's not a lot of women sculptors in your fonts, or there's not a lot of materials from the late 90s, or there's a particular movement that you would love to collect more from, but you haven't done that so far, either because you don't have the relationships or those folks haven't aren't ready to give you their materials yet, whatever the situation may be. As an archive, it's always a good practice to consider what other donors you could be cultivating. For me, I work at an oral history organization. Um, and I work at an organization that passively ingests some like 1,000 or so interviews in a given like 3 or 4 weeks. Um, right now, we are getting ready to cross the line of 500,000 interviews that have been collected. So that's a lot of material. Even so, that's not even close to the population of the United States. And there are plenty of cultures and subcultures who StoryCorps has limited or no oral histories representing. So this is a focus of several people on our staff to cultivate new folks that we can interview to better reflect our collections. What are the policies, or how have we positioned ourselves as an organization that's not invited those people in the door? And can we change those decisions that have led to it? So, four sort of pathways to cultivating donors in general through existing relationships. So if I am working at this sculptural archive, um, and I know that one of our donors who's still around was making a lot of objects in the 1970s, mentored artists who were working in the 90s and mentored several women, I could reach out to that person who I do have a relationship with and ask, hey, are there folks who you could connect me to who might be interested in donating their material to the archive? Um, Another option is through programming, through events of some kind. Even if the event is not necessarily about cultivating donors, getting your name out there is just a great way of building your reputation in the field. Um, Film screenings are a great programming option if you have film in your archive. Zine making workshops are relatively common options as well. Some like opportunity where you can interface with new people, folks who maybe have heard about you but haven't come through the door, and then they attend your event and they say, "Actually, I have this whole trove of stuff that I would love to be able to donate." For example, I was recently at a community archiving day at the Queens Museum. We collected about 10 oral histories the day of, and we had a couple dozen interviews from the sort of general Queens area, some of whom I imagine were attendees, some of whom maybe folks who had heard about the event but didn't attend it, or friends or friends of friends, folks who heard about us and decided to record with us. Uh, then the next option is through researching the materials that you have already on hand. There may be names that are coming up regularly, people who were collaborators, fellow sculptors, um, folks who you see in the materials already, but who may have collections of their own that they might want archived. So getting to know your own collection on deeper levels allows you to be able to quickly identify some folks who could expand out naturally from what you already have. And then fourth, this is definitely the most like shot in the dark kind of approach, but just through prospecting, through just searching on the internet, through like general knowledge of your field, whatever your collecting area is, taking a look at who's creating work at sculptural shows in New York City, who has in the last year or two. What spaces are the conversations in this field happening right now? And are you in those spaces? Can you be in them more? So, I'm gonna give a little practicum exercise. Feel free to pause the video and do this now, or feel free to do it later. But go ahead and navigate to the course website, and you will see a page where you can sign into CUNY Commons and comment on this exact question that I'm going to be asking here, which is a little thought experiment. You work at a local museum's archive. A previous donor of collections is interested in donating new materials that are outside of their signed deed of gift. So they gave you material, now they want to give you more. The materials are not particularly high value. You haven't really identified why they what use they may potentially have for future visitors, nor do they necessarily fall within the typical scope of your archive. The individual in question is a recurring financial supporter of the museum. So I am asking you to consider what questions might you ask this previous donor? Under what conditions might you accept the materials? When might you refuse the materials? Just 3 to 4 sentences. Go ahead and add them on the course website when you have the opportunity to do so. All right, so let's talk about users. Most commonly, you're interacting with users through what we call reference services, reference requests. Somebody comes to your archive or reaches out to you via email or via social media or via the phone, says they want to come view your collections, or they need help understanding your finding aids, or they just want to understand more about what your archive does, what sorts of material you have. This is most often how you're interacting with users. To give the SAA definition of reference, it's a service to aid patrons in locating materials relevant to their interests. See reference interview. In archives, like in libraries, the amount of reference work you do depends on your role and the kind of institution that you serve. So you may find yourself working at a repository that has what's called a reference archivist on staff, somebody whose entire job is servicing users. More often than not, you are going to be juggling reference services on top of your other tasks. And the level to which you're able to commit or willing to commit to doing so can really vary considerably. So let's define these terms that we've talked about throughout the class. Access, accessibility. I want to create a distinction between these two terms, which are certainly related to one another. They interact with one another considerably. But access is specifically the ability to locate relevant information through the use of catalogs, indexes, finding aids, or other tools. We create access um, uh, by organizing our materials, by putting them in comprehensible boxes, by creating inventory lists of them or finding aids or whatever discovery tools that we're using. We create access by digitizing objects, making them available online for people to view them. Um, uh, any work that is done in service of taking a collection of materials that was donated to you and making it usable by somebody in the future is part of the access process. Accessibility is the characteristic of being easily reached or used within within a minimum of barriers. Accessibility is accomplished through access work. It's also accomplished through direct intervention as necessary to ensure that certain populations have more of a roadmap in order to access your materials. So disabled populations are a common site of accessibility projects. For example, having your repository be friendly to folks who are hard of hearing through transcripts of audiovisual material, having your collection be friendly to physically disabled folks by having literally the entrance to the archive be wheelchair accessible. Um, uh, or being able to, on request, digitize objects for people who are not physically able to attend the collection or to visit the collection. Accessibility can also be not just focused on folks with disabilities. It can also be about a user population who maybe historically has been left out of archives or has been historically made to feel unwelcome in archives. So creating greater accessibility for Black and Brown visitors may involve a certain amount of work, certain amount of intervention, a certain amount of labor that goes into outreach, goes into relationship development, that goes into just showing up in community space so that folks know who you are and feel welcome, feel that you're a trusted resource that they can depend on. So let's ask this question of in what circumstances can or should archivists be doing research themselves as opposed to reference for a patron as part of their regular duties? So reference work involves pointing somebody to the archive, a resource that they're looking for, helping them navigate finding aids, helping them be able to get to the materials, understand how to locate objects. Research involves the process of interpreting those objects, making sense of them, making meaning out of them. There are some instances where archivists will be doing research on their own materials. That's appropriate. So the first of these is collection knowledge, so that you can better understand your collection. It's helpful to research your materials from time to time. If you're not a subject expert in whatever your archive is, let's say you work at a municipal archive and you've never worked in city planning and you have all of these blueprints and all of these permits that are filed in your repository, it could be helpful to research your materials, to spend time with them, to learn more about the field, so that you can service the materials better, so that you can help understand how to describe those materials better. Additionally, interaction knowledge can be helpful. If you are working with a previous donor, it could be helpful to do research on their collection so that you understand more about the conversation that you're having with them. Or if you're having a lot of researchers coming in, users who are particularly interested in a particular collection that you don't know a ton about, doing research so that you can manage that relationship, so that you can support those users better, is a perfectly valid approach to research. And finally, research knowledge can be used to advance a repository's direct goals or mission. This can involve perhaps you as an archivist want to publish an article in the Archival Outlook or some journal to speak on your collection. It could be helpful to do research before you write about your collection. It's in fact necessary. And that work makes your repository more visible. It increases the knowledge that folks have about your repository potentially could increase the number of people coming in the door. So these are some instances where you might be doing research yourself, where it's not appropriate is when you're doing a researcher's work for them, or when you are interpreting a collection on behalf of somebody who could be doing that work themselves. You have plenty on your plate as an archivist. You will very rarely are you going to be having a boring day with nothing on your back catalog of work to do. So rather than doing somebody else's work, keep the research to efforts that are going to extend your goals, make you a better provider of knowledge to people, make you a better describer of the collections, or make your archive a better resource to your user community. So let's talk about collection knowledge. What do we know about an archive? Archivists can provide 6 types of information to users and donors. All of these kinds of information are developed during the processing of collection, which we are going to get into next week. Information about the repository, so information about where you work, the sculptural archive, for example. You can provide information about where the archive came from, what your mission is, what your collecting areas are, etc. Information about the holdings, so information about what collections you have or about a particular collection, saying, hey, this is where this collection came from, it was processed during this time, like this is how this collection came to be. You can provide information from the holdings if that is particularly helpful to a user. You want to be a little bit careful here. This is where you can easily fall into the territory of doing your user's work for them. So to a limited extent, you can provide some information that comes directly from a collection, maybe as a way of helping somebody understand what the collection is, um, so that they can know if it's something that they want to work with or read more about or come see in person. But just be careful not to do too much of this. You could provide information about the record creators, who made these materials in the first place, and what was the chain of custody that got them here. You can refer folks to a different repository. If you say, we have some material about this sculptor, but they have more material at MoMA, or they have more material at the Leslie Lohman Museum, or any other any number of art repositories. Finally, you can provide information about laws or ethics regarding the use of information. These include things like copyright, what folks are allowed to use, as well as even if it's legal, is it an ethically responsible choice? For example, I've had to dissuade a number of times people who come into an archive and they see as part of the holdings uh, records that include people's phone numbers from like 10, 20 years ago. Um, I personally think, especially if those people didn't know that this object was going to be in the archive with their phone number or their email address, I don't think it's an ethical choice to reach out to them, to call their phone number, to cold call them and say, "Hi, I got your number from this thing that I found in this archive." That might freak somebody out and make them feel unsafe, uncomfortable. It's not necessarily an ethical use of that information. Um, but if somebody is like feeling like they're reaching a dead end trying to contact somebody or get more information, you can work with them on a more ethical approach to getting in contact with that person instead. All right, interaction knowledges. Who's, what's, will I's. So we talked before about donor behavior. Now let's get into user behavior. In the same way that you want to interrogate who's giving material to your archive, who's not, you want to be asking these questions about users as well. Who's using your archives materials right now? Why are they using it? Are they using it for classrooms? Are they using it for research of their own? Are they just curious? How are they contacting you? Are they contacting you at all? Do you have digitized collections and you see that you get a certain number of hits a month of people viewing your collections? Or are they contacting you directly? How many people are coming in for research visits? Um, how are they asking the question? Are they uh, is your user base generally the sort of folks who boss you around or feel entitled to boss you around? Do you need to set some boundaries with that user community? Or have you made the barriers to access too high, where folks feel like there's an imbalance of power and they can't necessarily ask for your help as clearly? Who are the askers to you? Are there precedents? Are there previous requests? Do you have a pattern of a type of question that gets asked a lot? And if so, is there a more effective way of answering it, a more automated way of answering that question? And what is the range of realistic outcomes? Are people reaching out to you asking questions that you can answer, or are you getting a lot of questions for things that are outside of your ability or comfort as an archive? Um, if they're outside of your ability, could be an option to, again, think about a way of automating the question or redirecting that question. How are you teeing up the conversation on your website, on your social media presence? Um, and are there ways that you can better support people uh, for the sorts of questions that you don't have the resources to answer? And finally, who's not using your collection? In some cases, there are folks who are not using your collection, and this is either a good thing or a neutral thing. They're just they're not related to your mission as an archive, or they're a user community that you would prefer not be using your materials. For example, if you are a Civil War archive and you notice that you do not get a lot of research requests from um, uh, folks who are perhaps especially enthusiastic about Robert E. Lee and the Confederacy and uh, the Confederate cause. That's not necessarily a failure of your archive. In fact, I would say that perhaps you're doing something that perhaps you're cultivating your user base carefully. But in other instances, there are users um, just in just about any archive, potential users who aren't using your collection. Um, and as much as you can interrogate where you're at right now, you can sort of start to build the pathways of how you can be interacting with more people in the future and those user populations that you don't have a relationship to right now. So here's a reference request. Here's an example. This came to Queens College's archives. And it's being asked by a retired professor preparing his memoirs. His wife's name is Roberta Lewis Giddings. She graduated from QC in 1964. Um, and she remembers being the valedictorian. And so this professor's reached out asking, can you help me verify that she was in fact the valedictorian? Might it have been on like a flyer or something? Couple approaches you could take to a question like this. You could tell somebody, come on in for that answer. Or uh, you could take a look holistically. What are they asking? What information do they need to know? Can I comfortably provide this information? This I would describe as a relatively low lift for Queens College's archive. Um, it could take about 5-10 minutes to locate the correct box, to track down the commencement materials from 1964 to be able to verify that name. Um, in this particular scenario, I would probably simply answer the question directly. No need for them to come in, no need to have a question negotiation process. They've asked for something simple, and it's something that we are able to provide them. So, what I just did was an assessment methodology. I thought about what the best approach was to answer this question, and I followed through on it. But these are the sort of questions that float around anytime that you are working with users. How do you know what a user's looking for, what to retrieve for them? What are they asking for? What is the thing that they actually need? Can we answer that question? Can someone else answer that question? And how much assistance are you willing to give? In a situation like this person is asking for whether this person was the valedictorian, and they're asking if that information is on the flyer. What they really want to know is this person the valedictorian? Can you do we have documented proof that they were the valedictorian? Can we answer the question? Yes, it's in our collection. Can someone else answer the question? Yes. Um, they could reach out to the registrar, excuse me, or to the CUNY admin. They would also likely have this information, uh, and it would take them roughly the same amount of time. The question here is how much assistance am I willing to give, and how much of this, what is going to be the sort of easiest path forward for everybody to be happy in this scenario. If I answer this question, it'll take me, like I said, 5 to 10 minutes, and I can give them a reply. That saves me having to reach out to the registrar. That saves a potential back and forth for potentially days or weeks between those parties trying to figure out this answer. And it saves everybody a headache in the long run for me to just simply take the time now to answer it. So here's another example. This person is a journalist working on a story about the school boycotts of 1964, focusing on the February 3rd, 1964 boycott at Queens College. I'm requesting access to your archives on the topic and for use of images information in my story. Let me know the best way to go about this, in person, online, etc. Thank you for your help. This is a lot that this person is asking for. And quite frankly, the reason that they're asking for this much is because they don't necessarily know exactly what it is that they want. They're not quite sure what it is that they're looking for. So what I would instead is I would elevate this to what I would call a question negotiation process. You could check out, there's a whole article on this question negotiation in the archival setting by Linda J. Long, which is where this quote comes from. Ambiguity on the part of users, if your user doesn't have a clear question for you, is frequently rooted in feelings of uncertainty or fear of seeming ignorant. Negotiating the question of what they're actually asking for, what they actually need, provides the opportunity for users to clearly state the research need themselves. It also discourages archivists from jumping to unwarranted conclusions. The first step into question negotiation process is to analyze the query into component parts as givens and wanted. What's given? What does the person know? In this case, they know about the boycott in 1964, and what do they want? They want some records relating to this information. In this case, how I would probably resolve this is I would probably direct this person to take a look at our finding aids, or take a look at the collections themselves. Using I would give them a guide that Queens College's Archives has created, that SCA has made, for using the archive, and I would encourage them to use search terms to identify specific materials or collections that they might want to see. And then we can go from there. But rather than just having somebody come to the archive and figure it out from there, when they don't know what they're looking for, they don't know what collections they want pulled, that's not a good use of anybody's time. So instead, teaching them how to search for what information exists, um, can guide that process. And if they come back to us saying, "Hey, can you tell me more about these collections?" and if they might have information about the boycott, we can go from there. All right, here's another example. This is somebody who is a senior. They're writing a history thesis on the business landscape of Flushing post 1965 with a focus on the impact of Asian immigration. I'm interested in doing research in the Queens College archives. I was wondering which day I could come in and receive some assistance. Thank you. So again, this is somebody who is coming in, or who's reaching out. They want to come in, but they don't have a specific collection in mind. They don't know exactly what it is they're looking for. So if they come to the archive, we may not have anything that could be useful for them. This is how the archivist responded. They said, "I'd be happy to help you, but I need you to be a little bit more specific. Um, do you need help reading finding aids, help figuring out what box folder information is, explanation of what a finding aid is?" This person um, responded saying, "I would appreciate help learning how to read the finding aids." So this person can come in, and the archivist can teach them one-on-one, or we could send them instructions for them to learn more and ask follow-up questions from there. This is all a process of negotiating ultimately what's the most helpful use of everybody's time, what questions are people actually asking, and how can we make that answer as clear as possible. So in this particular case, the archivist sat down, gave it some thought, um, and decided, actually, I took a look and jogged my own memory, thought more about the collections that we have, and I don't think that we have anything relevant to the topic of Flushing business community. Um, uh, they provide instructions of how to use a finding aid. They provide guidance on archival research in general. Um, uh, they found a resource for Barnard, which is where this person was studying, a LibGuide specifically for conducting archival research. They gave a little bit of information about the archival process itself, and then they provided a potential other archive to look for, in this case, the Queens Public Library Local History Archives. Pointed them in the direction of somewhere that might be helpful, taught them a little bit more about how to interact with archives in general. At that point, said, "I have other responsibilities as the archivist. There's only so much that I can do. This is not even a Queens College student. There are other folks who can help this person from here." All right, so let's talk about the information retrieval process. Somebody reaches out and asks you, "Hey, we want to borrow these materials from the archive." How does an archive retrieve those materials? How do we figure out what's in the archive? How do we find it within the archive? How do we access it? How does the user access those materials? This process is all made possible through, or the information retrieval, this act is all made possible through when a collection is processed. When a collection goes through the life cycle of being ingested into an archive, being organized, being rehoused, preserved as needed, described, and then had that description made accessible um, through inventory lists or indexes or finding aids or digitization projects. These are all pathways identifying how an object goes from being ingested into the archive to ending up in somebody's hand as they're looking at the table reviewing it, or ending up as a digitized object that lives on a screen for somebody to be able to access. In the case of working in person, I highly recommend to make the information retrieval process as transparent as possible. This means when you have made the decision that somebody will be coming into your archive, for example, um, you should provide very clear and explicit instructions for how to get there. For example, Caitlin at SCA provides a map, well, first off, provides an image of the Rosenthal Library, provides a map of the floor that the archive is on, which is the third floor, main floor, and then also provides a campus map showing where on campus the library is. These are all very helpful visual resources to help somebody figure out how to get to retrieving the information that they're looking for. Um, she even provides driving and public transportation information. If your archive is digital, or if you're seeking to help somebody who is trying to access materials digitally, then I highly recommend creating user guides of some shape and form, preferably multiple of them. Um, for different use cases, for different aspects of the archive, like reviewing a finding aid versus digital objects, specifically keyword searching. These are all different activities that users can undertake that they could benefit from a little bit of instruction that goes a long way to helping them feel like they are supported, know how to get the information they need, or what questions they can ask you. All right, so we talked in our last session about legalese, the relationship between archives and the law. We need to know a certain amount of this information, but we also need to be able to communicate a certain level of this knowledge to our users. We need to know our users to know how copyright works, what they're allowed to do with the materials in our collection, if they are able to use materials by posting them on their social media, by publishing images of those materials, by using those materials in a documentary potentially. Um, I find that the most effective way of doing this is through policies that you forward to somebody right at the beginning of the process, right as you're introducing them to the archival life cycle, introducing them to what it means to be a visitor at the archive, what your archive's procedures are, the policies around things like copyright. This is a great way that you can tee off and introduce it. Same with publication policy. This information can live on your website. You can also forward it to a user when they're coming into your archive before they come in. This is helpful information for somebody to have because if a documentarian is interested, is just searching for material that they can use, it saves them a lot of time if they know, ooh, I'm going to have to pay $10,000 to use this in my documentary. And maybe I don't want to do that. Okay, so moving into the third category of knowledge, research knowledge, which is how you, as an archivist, continue to get better at archivism over time. First off is domain knowledge. This is subject knowledge or your understanding of a subject. as that subject is being researched by a user. The more that you know about your domain, the more that you will likely be able to help somebody. You want to be able to be careful here. Your job, again, is not to tell people the truth. So you want to always check your biases, even and especially on subjects that you know a lot about. Because you can't assume that just because you know a lot about something that you know better than the user coming in, what the object is going to mean to them specifically. Artifactual literacy is one of those fancy academic buzzwords that SAA describes as the ability to understand, contextualize, and interpret primary sources, in part by taking into consideration their physical characteristics. Archivists spend a lot of our time becoming artifactually literate. You will develop this skill just through the processing of collections, through getting to know different materials, what they mean, how they're used in context, what the different relationships between types of materials or types of records are, or record groups are. You get to know more about the types of objects and how they were used in their original use, how they could be reinterpreted by users in the future. The more time that you spend working at a municipal archive, the more you're going to learn about bureaucratic procedures. The more time you spend working at a law archive, the more that you're going to learn about law processes, how those interact, and what vestigial remains do we have of legal actions. So what do the objects that we have really represent? What do they point towards about the legal process? Archival intelligence, conversely, is a person's knowledge of archival principles, practices, and institutions, and an understanding of the relationship between primary sources and their surrogates. Somebody can know a lot about a given topic without having ever gone into an archive. Conversely, somebody can have a lot of archival intelligence and have very little artifactual literacy. Um, if you don't have the opportunity to go into an archive, then you don't really have the opportunity to hone and develop the skill. This is something that is developed only by interacting with an archive. I'm sure there are many people in this class who, prior to attending this program, or potentially even to the present, never visited an archive of their own volition. Um, because the barriers can be really high, we have to remind ourselves that we can't assume that folks are coming in with this knowledge. So we need to be able to have systems and procedures that prep people, that help support folks at a variety of experience levels to be able to have them make the most of their experience at the archive. In general, even for seasoned researchers, I have found even for folks who have been publishing books for 30, 40 years, in fact, especially folks who've been publishing books for 30, 40 years, they're going to know less about archives than you expect. You're going to be surprised. These are memes specifically from The Meming Archivist, which is an Instagram handle I would highly recommend if you enjoy Instagram and you enjoy a little meme now and then. All of these are related to the frustrations that archivists can sometimes feel when interacting with researchers. For example, this meme on the left, when we try to explain what we do for a living to our patrons, this is referencing the fact that many researchers over the years have accused archivists of doing nothing, of sitting around and making their jobs as researchers harder because they don't see the work that you're doing or they don't understand the work, and so therefore they assume that you're not doing work. For example, when you are the archivist, historian, social media manager, janitor, supervisor, and spokesperson for the archive, you are carrying a lot of hats, and a lot of these hats, as I said, are not necessarily visible to the folks who are coming in to view your archive. Some folks may assume that you're regularly interacting with materials and that you know everything in all of your collections down to the box. This is not necessarily the case. So anyway, what these memes point to is a lack of understanding of one another. And I don't want to reinforce the stereotype that archivists and researchers are enemies on opposite sides of the interaction. In fact, I think that we have way more in common than we do apart from one another, and the relationship doesn't need to be antagonistic, shouldn't be antagonistic. But the sort of culture around archives has has set us up for failure between users and archivists. In one sense, there are many potential users who don't feel comfortable entering an archive because we have a level of power of information. There's a level of awe or mystique around the archive that it's our responsibility as the one with the power to disrupt. On the other hand, you have folks who do feel empowered and welcomed to entering into an archive, but who still don't necessarily understand what you do, and may feel entitled to more from you, may feel that you are the antagonist who's preventing them from getting their work done. Um, Researchers have been taught to use what I call an extractive mindset when talking about archives. What I mean by an extractive mindset is that they think that they are taught to think that the job of a researcher is to go into an archive, extract knowledge from the archive, plumb the depths, find the useful information, and slot it into their research to be able to prove a point. Um, this is reinforced by a couple factors. Uh, Patriarchy and masculinity and its relationship to academia is certainly one of them, but another one is researchers have very little resources for research. Um, Often researchers have no stipends at all or very, very small stipends. So if they're able to do research at your repository, they're taking time out of their day and coming to you to do this research because it's important to them, because it's meaningful for their research. But they are sacrificing a lot just to come to the archive. So because of that, there's this mindset of they're on the clock. They need to process as much information as they can in a small amount of time. So they need to just quickly figure out what are those extraction points that they can pull knowledge out of the archive for them to be able to use later. This this creates a lot of tension. Um, uh, as I said, archival researchers, this is from On Archival Research, which was published in Transatlantica. Um, Archival researchers usually have no formal training for the work that they do. They figure out how to search documents and how to talk to archivists, how to figure out how to do research, basically on their own. Very few programs are actively training folks, taking the time to teach folks how to do archival research. So bad practices get reinforced over time. This is from the History of Research journal, and it's a piece called Ethics and Truth in Archival Research. Um, this is somebody who is not an archivist talking about their experience, who describe uh, I to me it like these passages read like somebody who's like visiting a zoo. Library archives are strangely exciting places. To open a box or a book on a page of old handwriting with its browning ink on yellowing paper requires a steady nerve. There's a romance to how this researcher and how many researchers talk about archives, um, which can feel dehumanizing, or it could just feel like out of touch with your work as an archivist. But something that's also helpful that I find in this piece is that they talk about their emotional life in the archives. They talk about feeling pressured. They talk about feeling frustrated, that they couldn't change their requests. They felt lost, trying to figure out what boxes to choose from. These point to very real limitations in the work of archivists. Here's another researcher. This is from Princeton, talking about how archival research is unpredictable. Some days you find nothing. Some days you find sources that completely change your understanding of a project. You can't control or predict the kind of day that you have. You can only open the next box. This is another person talking about their research process, talking about how they found it somewhat random a lot of the time. Um, uh, but in other aspects, they had a highly ordered process, either because the archivist required certain specifications or limitations to them, or because they learned through doing the archival research how to more effectively or efficiently do that research for them. Um, what I find most interesting about this piece is the way that they talk about that their approach to their research and their approach to archives in general and archival research in particular was most evolved through the process of doing it. Just by doing the work, you develop a better sense for it, but it requires time and resource and patience that not necessarily everybody is going to be able to afford. I'm going to keep us moving forward um, uh, by sort of winding us towards two potential approaches to archival research that I think can help us move away from this like stressed out, romantic, but also extractive mindset of, oh, I only have so much time. I need to pull out what I can. Um, and this dang archivist needs to stop getting in my way. So I talk like in thinking about the extractive mindset, this phrase, the Holy Grail, comes up a fair amount of time when people talk about archival research, when researchers do in particular. Um, the Holy Grail being, oh, that beautiful, perfect object that I've been looking for all along. And that it's almost impossible to find this Holy Grail. They're looking for that one piece of research, that one piece of knowledge that validates their research. One strategy to maybe disrupt the hunt for the Holy Grail is to encourage users to adjust their research strategy. Rather than thinking about what am I looking for? I just need to find evidence for the thing that I'm looking for. Encouraging more of a process of what emerges. Encouraging what this might look like is encouraging somebody, hey, don't take out 12 boxes today. You only have so much time. Take out 3 boxes. Start with those 3 boxes and take time with those boxes. Really sit with them and try to understand the relationships of those documents and what information might exist there, rather than sift through and find the one bit of information that you think that you're looking for. Discover what kind of knowledge might emerge from that collection and how it may shape your research later. Lisa Stead, for example, argues that greater archival reflexivity helps consider not only the archive as a source, but as a subject itself. Um, uh, when you're researching Kubrick, Stanley Kubrick, and many of the boxes don't even mention him and weren't even created by him, but by a myriad of administrators, secretaries, and other laborers. What does this tell you about the Stanley Kubrick archive? What it could tell you is that Stanley Kubrick, as visionary and auteur as one might think of him, was surrounded by collaborators, was surrounded by an ecosystem of support that made his films possible. How he created the works that he is known for is ultimately informed by these different actors involved in his life, these different participants working in different roles to help facilitate the work that he ultimately created. Okay. I'm going to skip past this one for now. This is one of the more infuriating research papers that I um, have read about archives. But the one thing that I will point out here is that she describes herself shaking her fists at the gods, complaining, why was this organized by year and not by subject? I know better than the archivist. And rather than taking the time to understand why the archivist arranged this collection, I am frustrated that I'm not finding the thing that I'm looking for in the speediest way possible. Anyway, what I would say um, to somebody who is oriented towards that extractive mindset um, is that while I recognize that you have limitations, we have limitations too. How can we meet in the middle here? We don't have to be enemies in this process. Uh, if you have feedback or result or recommendations, requests for how we make materials accessible, or even recommendations about how we archive, that's one thing. But to operate under the assumption that you know better isn't necessarily a productive mindset for them as a researcher or for the relationship that we will have as archivist and researcher. The second approach, and this I think is really one of the most crucial interventions that we can do as archivists, is to demystify what our work is and encourage users to better understand what it is that we do. If folks don't understand why we arrange a collection by subject and not by year, or by year and not by subject, then it's just a black box of information. But the more transparent we make our processes by talking about what it is that we do in our finding aids, we provide, if you provide information about the archival process, what was done to the collection, why and how, um, if you take the time to sit with researchers, to get to know their research needs, to talk with them about the collection, tell them more about where it came from, and appear at conferences and things, be in the spaces with folks. You can cultivate ultimately more healthy, more sustainable relationships between the two. This is from a really excellent article called Working in the Archives, Practical Research Message for Rhetoric and Composition. I really love this quote here. We believe that if archival researchers know how to recognize the outcomes of archivist processing and understand the principles behind processing decisions, they will have a better understanding of the archival materials they study. Brings us back full circle as to why I want to situate this conversation before we even get into processing the boxes themselves. Um, is that I want you to think about as we move into the part of this course where we're actually going to be processing materials or thinking about the process, the preservation, the description, assigning metadata, and ultimately outreach opportunities with materials. I encourage you to think every step of the way, what is it that I'm doing? How can I make it transparent to somebody 10, 20, 30 years from now what I did to this object to put it in the state that it is now? Or what did I do to this collection that took it from the form that it came in, that messy collection of boxes with Alice Sardell's name on it, to ultimately a processed collection that represents some body of knowledge that existed within those materials. So I'm going to leave you on these questions to ponder yourself throughout this semester. How do archivists bridge gaps in archival intelligence to the benefit of all users? How do we convince users that archival intelligence is important? And how do we get users and researchers to see us and use us as archivists and not just as the terminology is box jockeys or handmaidens of history, passive terms? How do we instead become active collaborators? Okay. You have the finding aid analysis coming up, is due relatively soon. Additionally, please fill out the practicums for this week's lessons by the end of the week. You can do that on the course website. And please reach out to me if you have any questions as you do any of that work. And I will see you all very soon. Take care.